The Grand Regent Ballroom shimmered beneath towering crystal chandeliers, their golden light reflecting off polished marble floors and walls lined with priceless artwork. Soft violin music drifted through the air as nearly 200 of the city's wealthiest and most influential people gathered for the annual Legacy of Hope Charity Gala. Billionaires discussed investments over champagne. Politicians exchanged carefully rehearsed smiles with celebrities. Cameras flashed every few seconds, capturing elegant gowns, designer tuxedos, and million-dollar jewelry. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of generosity, but behind the polished smiles, everyone was competing for status. Near the entrance stood a man who seemed invisible. He looked to be in his early 50s. His dark suit was clean but noticeably old-fashioned, as though it had been carefully preserved for years. His shoes showed signs of wear, yet they were polished to perfection. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his calm eyes quietly observed the room without seeking anyone's attention. No one recognized him. Some guests assumed he was a retired teacher. Others whispered that he must have wandered in by mistake. A few staff members glanced at him suspiciously, wondering why someone so ordinary had appeared at one of the city's most exclusive events. The man simply smiled politely whenever someone looked his way. Hidden beneath the sleeve of his jacket was a finely embroidered silver crest stitched onto a white handkerchief. He occasionally touched it as though it carried memories far more valuable than anything inside the ballroom. Across the room stood Vanessa Ashcroft, one of the city's most famous socialites and the glamorous face of several luxury brands. Confident, wealthy, and accustomed to being the center of attention, she believed every important person in the room should know exactly who she was. When she noticed the quiet stranger standing alone near the refreshment table, her smile faded. "Who invited him?" she whispered to a friend. Her friend shrugged. "I've never seen him before." Vanessa watched as the stranger accepted a simple glass of sparkling water from a waiter and quietly thanked him. The waiter smiled warmly in return, but Vanessa interpreted the scene differently. To her, the man's humble appearance made him look like an uninvited guest trying to blend in among people who didn't belong to his world. Determined to make an example of him, she walked confidently across the ballroom. The conversations around them gradually slowed. Standing only a few feet away, Vanessa looked him up and down before speaking loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "I think you've mistaken this place for a public fundraiser," she said with a mocking smile. "This event is invitation only." The stranger met her eyes calmly. "I know," he replied gently. His quiet confidence irritated her even more. Without another word, Vanessa grabbed the glass of expensive red wine from a nearby table and flung it directly into his face. The deep crimson liquid splashed across his jacket and slowly dripped onto the marble floor. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. A few guests laughed nervously. Others pulled out their phones. The stranger didn't shout. He didn't defend himself. He simply removed the silver-embroidered handkerchief from his pocket and slowly wiped the wine from his face with remarkable composure. Then something impossible happened. The orchestra abruptly stopped playing. Every security officer standing near the entrance straightened in unison. The chairman of the charity turned pale. One by one, conversations died. An eerie silence swept across the ballroom as powerful men and women stared, not at Vanessa, but at the soaked stranger. The master of ceremonies gripped the microphone with trembling hands before quietly announcing, "Ladies and gentlemen, our guest of honor has arrived." Every eye in the room turned toward the man Vanessa had just humiliated. The silence in the ballroom felt heavier than the marble beneath everyone's feet. Vanessa's confident smile disappeared. Just moments earlier, she had been certain she was exposing an intruder. Now, every influential guest seemed frozen, staring at the quiet stranger with a mixture of shock, respect, and fear. Yet the man himself showed no anger. Without saying a single word, he gave a small nod to the master of ceremonies and quietly excused himself. "If you'll pardon me," he said softly, "I'd like to clean up before we continue." He walked away with calm dignity, leaving behind 200 stunned guests. Down a quiet hallway lined with framed photographs of past charity events, the stranger entered a small guest restroom. He removed his stained jacket and carefully cleaned the wine from the fabric with a damp cloth. His movements were slow and practiced, as if he had learned long ago that dignity wasn't measured by how people treated him, but by how he responded. As he stepped back into the hallway, a loud crash echoed from the nearby service corridor. A young waiter named Ethan stood frozen beside a shattered silver tray. Crystal glasses lay broken across the floor, and expensive bottles of champagne had spilled everywhere. The restaurant manager stormed toward him. "What have you done?" the manager shouted. "Do you know how much that costs? This is your third week here." Ethan's face turned pale. I'm sorry, sir. My mother is in the hospital. I haven't been sleeping. I don't want excuses." The manager pointed toward the exit. "You're finished." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes. Losing this job meant he could no longer help pay for his mother's medical treatment. Before the manager could say another word, the stranger quietly stepped forward. "It was an accident," he said calmly. The manager frowned. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." "It does now." The stranger bent down without hesitation and began picking up the broken glass himself. Embarrassed, Ethan quickly knelt beside him. "You don't have to help me," Ethan whispered. The man smiled warmly. "Sometimes," he replied, "the people who need kindness the most are the ones everyone else blames." Those simple words struck Ethan harder than any lecture could have. The stranger reached into his jacket pocket and handed the manager an envelope. "This should cover the damages." The manager opened it. Inside was far more money than the broken glasses were worth. His expression immediately changed. I didn't realize." The stranger gently interrupted. "No one should lose hope over one mistake." The manager lowered his head in embarrassment. As Ethan helped him brush the last pieces of glass into a bin, something slipped from the stranger's pocket and landed softly on the floor. It was an antique silver pocket watch. Ethan quickly picked it up. "I'm sorry, sir." As he handed it back, the watch accidentally opened. Inside was a faded photograph of a smiling little girl, no older than 6, sitting on the stranger's shoulders beneath a large oak tree. Opposite the photograph, written in elegant handwriting, were the words, "Always choose kindness, especially when kindness isn't returned." For the first time, Ethan noticed sadness in the stranger's eyes. The man gently closed the watch and smiled. "She taught me that." Before Ethan could ask who the little girl was, voices echoed from the ballroom. Several distinguished guests were approaching quickly. An elderly retired judge stopped a few feet away. His eyes widened the moment he saw the stranger. With visible emotion, the judge removed his hat, bowed his head respectfully, and spoke words that left Ethan completely speechless. "Your Excellency, after all these years, we thought you were gone." The stranger looked at him quietly. "I've simply been living where titles no longer matter." Ethan stared between the two men, his heart racing. Who was this quiet stranger, and why were some of the most powerful people in the city treating him with such extraordinary respect? The hallway fell silent after the retired judge spoke those unexpected words. Ethan looked from the elderly man to the quiet stranger, searching for an explanation. The title, "Your Excellency," echoed in his mind. It wasn't something people casually said. Whoever this man was, he had once held a position that commanded extraordinary respect. The stranger offered the judge a gentle smile. "You don't have to call me that anymore," he said softly. "Those days are long behind me." The judge shook his head. Respect doesn't disappear with time. Before either man could continue, the chairman of the charity hurried down the hallway, accompanied by several members of the organizing committee. Their expressions were filled with anxiety rather than authority. "Sir," the chairman said, lowering his head, "please, allow us to apologize for what happened." The stranger simply replied, "There's nothing to apologize for." People judge with the information they have. His calm response only deepened everyone's guilt. Back inside the ballroom, however, Vanessa was struggling to understand what had just happened. The whispers around her had become impossible to ignore. Is it really him? I thought he died years ago. My grandfather used to tell stories about that crest. Look at the handkerchief, it bears the silver laurel emblem. Vanessa frowned. She had never heard of the silver laurel before, but the fear in everyone's voices unsettled her. Determined to uncover the truth, she quietly slipped away from the ballroom and entered the Charity Foundation's private archive room, a place where old records, photographs, and newspaper clippings from decades of fundraising events were stored. Dust covered the shelves. Yellowed files stretched back more than 40 years. She searched for anything connected to the mysterious crest. After several minutes, she found an old leather binder labeled "Founding Benefactors." Inside were photographs of the charity's earliest supporters. As she turned another page, her breathing stopped. There, in a much younger photograph, stood the quiet stranger. He wore a military-style ceremonial suit with the same silver crest embroidered across his chest. Beside him were orphan children, hospital staff, firefighters, and community volunteers. Every face around him was smiling. Beneath the photograph was a handwritten caption. The anonymous founder who refused public recognition. Anonymous? Vanessa blinked in confusion. If he had founded the charity, why had no one recognized him tonight? She continued reading. Page after page described anonymous donations that had saved hospitals from closing, funded children's cancer treatments, rebuilt schools after devastating fires, and established scholarships for thousands of students. Each donation carried only one signature. A tiny silver crest. No name. No publicity. No interviews. No awards. Nothing. Vanessa felt a knot forming in her stomach. Could the man she had humiliated be responsible for changing thousands of lives? Just then, something slipped from between two pages and fell onto the floor. It was an old newspaper. Its headline immediately caught her attention. National hero presumed dead after saving hundreds during river disaster. Below the headline was a large black and white photograph. Vanessa's hands began trembling. It was the same man. Younger. Smiling. Alive. The article claimed he had sacrificed himself rescuing passengers during a catastrophic bridge collapse 26 years earlier. His body had never been recovered, and the nation had mourned him as a hero. But that was impossible. She had just thrown wine into the face of a man officially declared dead. As she reached the final page of the article, another folded document slid free. Before she could open it, the archive room door suddenly slammed shut. The handle refused to turn. Someone had locked her inside. From the other side of the door, a deep voice whispered. Some secrets were buried for a reason, and they should have stayed buried. Vanessa's heart pounded as slow footsteps began walking away down the empty hallway. Vanessa rushed to the archive room door, twisting the brass handle with both hands. It wouldn't move. Hello? She shouted, pounding against the heavy oak door. Is someone there? Only silence answered. Her breathing grew shallow as she looked back at the scattered documents on the floor. Whoever had locked her inside clearly didn't want her reading them. That realization frightened her more than being trapped. With trembling hands, she unfolded the second document. It wasn't a newspaper article. It was a confidential investigative report stamped classified. Across the top, in faded typewriter ink, was a single name. Jonathan Hale. Her eyes widened. Jonathan. The quiet stranger. The report described how, 26 years earlier, Jonathan had uncovered a sophisticated corruption network involving powerful business leaders, politicians, and charity executives. Millions of dollars donated for hospitals, schools, and orphanages had been secretly diverted into private accounts. Jonathan had refused to stay silent. Instead of protecting his fortune, he gathered evidence and prepared to expose everyone involved. But before he could testify, disaster struck. The official story claimed Jonathan had died while rescuing passengers during the Riverstone Bridge collapse. The public celebrated him as a fallen hero. The truth was far darker. The bridge disaster had been real, but someone had used the chaos to erase him. Believing Jonathan was dead, the conspirators destroyed records, rewrote history, and quietly took control of the charitable foundation he had built. Vanessa felt sick. Many of the surnames listed in the report were painfully familiar. Some belonged to families sitting in tonight's ballroom. One belonged to her own grandfather. She staggered backward. No, she whispered. Her family fortune. The luxurious life she had always taken pride in. It had been built upon money stolen from children, hospitals, and families Jonathan had sacrificed everything to help. Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt genuine shame. Meanwhile, back in the ballroom, Jonathan stood calmly before the guests. The chairman stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice shaking, "there is something this organization should have acknowledged many years ago." Before he could continue, a distinguished businessman abruptly interrupted. "That's enough." Every head turned. Victor Ashcroft. Vanessa's uncle and one of the city's most influential businessmen. His expression remained composed, but his eyes betrayed panic. "There is no reason to reopen old wounds," Victor said firmly. "Tonight is about charity, not history." Jonathan looked directly at him. "It is always about history," he replied quietly. "Because history decides whether justice survives." The room fell silent. Victor forced a smile. People remember legends differently over time. Jonathan reached into his coat pocket and slowly removed the silver pocket watch. He opened it. Inside was the photograph of the little girl. "My greatest regret," he said softly, "was believing I could protect my daughter from the consequences of telling the truth." A murmur swept across the ballroom. "Daughter? I thought she died." Jonathan closed the watch. So did everyone else. At that exact moment, the ballroom doors opened. An elderly woman entered, supported by a cane. She carried a weathered envelope sealed with the same silver crest embroidered on Jonathan's handkerchief. Tears streamed down her face as she approached him. "I promised your wife," she whispered, "that I would only return this when it was finally safe." Jonathan stared at the envelope without touching it. He knew exactly what was inside. The last letter his wife had ever written. And the answer to the mystery of what had really happened to their daughter. The entire ballroom held its breath as Jonathan slowly reached for the envelope. Cliffhanger, before he could break the seal, Victor Ashcroft shouted, "Don't open it." Revealing that whatever the letter contained could destroy not only his family's legacy, but the reputations of some of the most powerful people in the country. The ballroom was so silent that the crackle of the old envelope sounded louder than the whispers of nearly 200 guests. Jonathan Hale held the weathered letter in trembling hands. For 26 years, he had carried unanswered questions, about his wife, his daughter, and the betrayal that had stolen both his family and his name. Now, the truth rested inside a single envelope. Across the room, Victor Ashcroft took a desperate step forward. "Jonathan," he said, forcing a calm smile, "whatever is in that letter belongs in the past. Opening it will only hurt innocent people." Jonathan looked at him with quiet sadness. "The truth doesn't hurt innocent people," he replied. "Lies do." With steady hands, he broke the wax seal. Inside were 2 items. The first was a handwritten letter from his late wife, Elizabeth. The second was a small silver necklace engraved with the same silver laurel crest that appeared on Jonathan's handkerchief and pocket watch. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. He read the letter aloud. "My dearest Jonathan, if you're reading this, then somehow you've survived. They will try to convince the world that our family disappeared. Don't believe them. I entrusted our daughter to someone whose heart could never be bought. She carries the silver laurel necklace. One day, when justice is finally stronger than fear, it will lead her back to you." The room fell completely still. The necklace had never been a symbol of wealth. It was a promise. A promise that truth and kindness would one day reunite a broken family. Before anyone could speak, a young woman stepped forward from the back of the ballroom. She had been volunteering quietly throughout the evening as part of the event's medical team. Dr. Grace Carter. Everyone knew her as one of the city's most compassionate physicians. Slowly, she reached beneath the collar of her dress. Around her neck hung an identical silver laurel necklace. Jonathan stared at it in disbelief. His hands began to shake. Grace looked at the old photograph inside his pocket watch. Then at the letter. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I've worn this necklace my entire life," she whispered. "The woman who raised me always said it belonged to my real parents." Jonathan could barely breathe. He opened the pocket watch once more and showed her the faded photograph of a little girl sitting on his shoulders beneath the great oak tree. Grace looked at the picture. Then smiled through tears. "I remember that tree." The words shattered the final wall between them. Jonathan crossed the room, and for the first time in 26 years, a father embraced the daughter he had believed was lost forever. The ballroom erupted, not in applause, but in tears. Even those who had once doubted Jonathan lowered their heads in shame. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice trembling. "I judged you because of your clothes, and never saw your heart. I'm so sorry." Jonathan gently smiled. "If my life has taught me anything," he said, "it's that forgiveness builds a better future than revenge ever could." Security officers quietly escorted Victor Ashcroft away as investigators arrived with the evidence hidden for decades. Justice would finally be served, not through anger, but through truth. As father and daughter stood together beneath the crystal chandeliers, the silver laurel crest had become more than a family symbol. It had become a legacy. A reminder that kindness may be ignored, mocked, or betrayed. But in the end, it is the one thing that truly survives. 6 months later, the city looked very different. The corruption scandal exposed at the Legacy of Hope Charity Gala had made national headlines. Several powerful business leaders and public officials who had stolen charitable funds decades earlier were convicted, and millions of dollars in recovered assets were redirected to hospitals, schools, orphanages, and community programs. For the first time in a generation, justice had quietly caught up with power. Yet Jonathan Hale never gave a single television interview. When reporters gathered outside his modest home, hoping to hear the remarkable story of the man who had returned from history, he politely smiled and declined every request. "I didn't spend my life helping people to become famous," he said. "I did it because someone needed help." Those simple words spread across the country, inspiring countless acts of generosity. The grand ballroom where everything had begun no longer hosted exclusive galas. Instead, Jonathan donated the building to create the Silver Laurel Children's Foundation, a place where children from struggling families could receive free education, medical care, counseling, and scholarships. Every morning, laughter replaced the sound of expensive champagne glasses. The marble floors once walked by billionaires were now filled with children carrying books, painting colorful murals, and chasing one another through bright hallways. Jonathan often stood quietly in the garden, watching them play. Beside him was Grace. Although they had lost 26 years together, neither of them wasted another day looking backward. Grace continued her work as a physician, providing free medical care through the foundation, while Jonathan devoted himself to mentoring young people who had grown up believing the world had forgotten them. Together, they rebuilt not only their family but also a community. Vanessa Ashcroft changed as well. The woman who had once measured people by appearance now volunteered at the foundation every weekend. She personally funded scholarships for underprivileged students and publicly acknowledged the role her family's wealth had played in past injustices. One afternoon, she approached Jonathan as children played nearby. I used to believe respect came from money, she admitted. Now I understand it's earned through kindness. Jonathan smiled warmly. The important thing isn't who you were, he said. It's who you choose to become. For the first time in years, Vanessa smiled without pride. Only gratitude. As the foundation celebrated its opening anniversary, Grace unveiled a bronze statue in the center of the garden. Many expected it to be a monument to Jonathan. Instead, it depicted a simple hand offering another hand a chance to stand. On its stone base were engraved the words Elizabeth had written so many years before. Always choose kindness, especially when kindness isn't returned. Jonathan quietly touched the inscription before slipping his old silver pocket watch into the foundation's museum. Beside it rested the silver laurel necklace and the embroidered handkerchief, symbols not of wealth or status, but of faith, sacrifice, and unconditional love. As the sun began to set, Jonathan walked through the garden surrounded by laughing children. No cameras followed him. No applause echoed behind him. He had everything he had ever truly wanted. His daughter walked beside him. Hope had returned to the city. And the legacy built through compassion would outlive every fortune, every title, and every scandal. The final image showed a young boy helping another child who had fallen while playing. Neither child realized Jonathan was watching from a distance with a quiet smile. The cycle of kindness had begun again.